favorite? Do you have a favorite book? Some people aren't into reading, but some people maybe have a favorite book.
I read a few books by this guy Sam Sheridan that I liked, and one was A Fighter's Mind.
Yeah.
And he like did interviews with like different athletes of like combat sports or wrestling and stuff like that, and kind of dove into how they think about competing and stuff like that. Like I'd recommend that to anybody who's in MMA, because MMA is really, it's mostly mental. I mean, definitely physical. You got to get ready for your fight and stuff. But if you don't have it up here, it doesn't matter how strong you are in the body. You're not gonna be successful.
Dope. So another episode of Adversity Kings. We've got UFC former contender, right?
Yep.
UFC former contender Ricardo Lamas. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. How you doing today, bro?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. We've done a mini podcast before this, but hopefully we can get all the information. Is that good?
Yeah, good.
All right, making sure that isn't. We were talking about kicks. So we were talking about kicks, and you were talking about building up your shins. What were you saying about building up your shins?
Yeah, just like building up the calluses. You basically kind of like got to deaden the nerves in your shins.
Yeah.
I was talking about like when I first started training Muay Thai and stand up, I remember being with like another beginner guy.
Yeah.
And we had shin pads on, and we were like practicing checking kicks. It's basically where you block the kick with kind of the mid portion of your shin.
Yeah.
And even both of us wearing shin pads on, we were like, like every third one. So it takes years of just constant, hitting the bag, 100 kicks every day, tapping the bag, and you basically just kind of deaden up the nerves and build calluses kind of over the bone, and your shins get tougher and harder. And now, like, you could
the kids that grew up really riding the scooters, though, they probably have an advantage if they ever try to get into fighting.
Oh yeah,
you ever scooter ever swing around and fuck your shit up? So, we were talking about a bunch of different shit, but I was thinking of we were talking about John Jones and Francis Ngannou.
Yeah.
And I believe his intentions are to fight Francis or to get into the heavyweight division.
The heavyweight division, I think his
challenge.
Yeah, I think his first fight might be against Stipe. Is kind of some rumblings I've been hearing, but yeah, he's definitely. They've been trying to get that Ngannou fight. I think he's just asking for a ridiculous amount of money to fight Ngannou, which, it's a huge fight, so they're going to have to pay out to get those two to fight each other for sure.
And then one thing I was also curious about is I've heard, I don't know if you follow the Paul brothers at all, but I've heard like Jake Paul, talk about, I don't know if he's trying to get under Dana's skin, but like more benefits for fighters. I always wonder, because I know being in business myself, like, people might see all this money coming in, but there's a profit margin. I got taxes, I got expenses. We pay for this building, we pay for this studio. Even though like a lot comes in, a lot goes out. When you're a fighter, you're a business owner. You are your business.
Yes.
You got a corner you pay. Do you get taxed in the state you live in and then the state you fight in? Like,
sometimes, yeah. Depending on what state you fight in, you could get taxed from that state, and then you have to pay the taxes of the salary that you receive, because we're not employees, we're technically independent contractors.
So there isn't benefits.
There's no benefits. No, they had like a and it wasn't always, but they brought in kind of a medical insurance for us.
Yeah.
So, but it would only cover us for incidents that occurred during training or at the fight itself. So if like we were in training camp and we hurt ourselves, we'd call the UFC, they'd set it up and they'd kind of take care of it.
Yeah.
But if we were like, oh, I got a cold, I got to go see the doctor, that's something that it wouldn't cover,
I would say the fighting probably has to be the most detrimental sport to the body. I mean, especially when you get into like the UFC, and I look at some of these fighters where it's like years down the road, it's like, there should be, in my mind, it makes sense where, Jake Paul and everybody, these guys are talking about like there should be a pension or something. Is something in place where it's just like more protective or something to kind of contribute and give back? Because once you cut everything down after these big fights and things, there's a lot that has to go out. You know what I mean? You got coaches, corners, this, that, the other. You know what I mean? Then you got a family you're trying to build, whatever it might be, and live your life and eat and this, that, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and not only stuff that has to go out after the fight, but stuff that has to go in before the fight even happens. Like, in my case, I live here in Illinois, but I would train down in Miami for my fights. So that costs money, right, to do that. It's not free. And I'm not the only fighter that does that. I think it's pretty common for other fighters to travel, either if they're trying to train at a big camp like an ATT or something, but they don't live in Florida, they have to travel down and they have to pay their way. And, you know, I had to rent a place, I had to pay for flight, I had to rent a car if I didn't drive my car. And, you know, there's a lot of expenses that go into that. And then on the other end, you have to pay out, you know, you got to give a percentage to your gym, to your corners. You got to pay taxes, and there's, you know, whatever you're getting paid, you're only kind of taking home a fraction of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What inspired you to get into fighting?
It's something that I wanted to do since I was a kid, pretty much. I was the youngest of 6 boys. Fighting in my house was kind of a normal thing growing up with my older brothers. And me being the youngest, I'd receive the brunt of all the beatings. And I remember when it comes to the UFC, so I was about 11 years old, and one of my older brothers brought home a VHS tape, and it was like the 3rd event that the UFC ever put on, UFC 3. And this was back when it was no holds barred, no gloves, no weight classes, basically no rules. And he came home and I watched it, and I was hooked, because at that time, like I said, there were no weight classes. But this guy, Hoist Gracie, who was, you know, a littler dude, maybe 180 pounds, was whooping up on everybody, you know, even the big, strong dudes. And as a little kid, I was always like one of the smallest in my classes growing up. That appealed to me, right? That this little guy could beat all these bigger guys. So I really kind of set it in the back of my head that I wanted to do that one day. And, you know, even through high school, I remember like friends would come over, we'd be like lifting in my basement watching like UFC, and I tell them that they'd see me in there one day. So it was something I always had in the back of my mind. And when I hit high school, I started, even before high school, I started doing martial arts, because I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee growing up. He was like an idol of mine. So I started doing Taekwondo around 10 years old, did that for a couple years. Then when I hit high school, I started wrestling, really fell in love with that sport, and did that through college. And then the year after I graduated, I stayed on. I wrestled at Elmhurst College over here. And the year I graduated, I stayed on as an assistant coach, because I just, you know, didn't want to leave the sport yet. And I just remember kind of being on the sidelines coaching the wrestlers, but still having that desire inside me to compete. So after about a year of coaching, I was like, you know, I'm not done yet. I need to keep competing. So at that time, I was working at the Park District in Oak Brook, and there was another trainer there who had a boxing and Muay Thai background. So I talked to him and told him about how, you know, I wanted to try MMA. And he's like, well, you know, why don't you come by? At that time, he was branching off and kind of opening up his own little spot. And he's like, why don't you come by my gym and you can learn a little bit of the stand-up game. So I started going over there. I was going for 2 weeks and basically knew how to throw like a jab cross hook. And he's like, I got you a fight next Wednesday. I was like, what? So he like threw me into a boxing fight just to see if I had the balls to do it.
Yeah.
I did. I lost a decision, but like he knew that I was serious about it. So we just kind of built from there. I did a couple more boxing fights, and I was like, yo, enough with the boxing. I want to do MMA. So then we finally set it. And I was the first guy out of his gym to fight MMA.
Wow. And what was his name again?
His name was Mac Ramos, and his gym is called Top Notch, and they're over in Villa Park now.
Are you still cool with him?
I'm still cool with him. Yeah, we don't. I don't really train. I don't train over there anymore.
Yep.
You know, towards the end of my career, we kind of went separate ways.
Yep. So, who do you think was the most influential person in your life growing up?
My dad, 100%.
And why is that?
Just because when it comes to like a father figure and someone who would do anything for their kids, my dad like was that guy. He gave us everything that we needed. You know, he tried to give us everything that we wanted, and he's a man of tremendous morals, I would say. And just looking up to him, the stuff that he went through in his life and came to this country with basically nothing and built himself up to a successful man, successful businessman, had a great family, you know, and just talking about somebody with heart and like just fight in him. I think like I get it from him. I've just seen him in altercations and situations where like a normal person would be like, okay, this is dangerous. I'm going to leave this alone. But he just like head on, like just
like a bull.
Like a bull, exactly.
Now, from Cuba,
From Cuba, yep.
Now your mom also?
My mom was born in Mexico.
Born in Mexico?
Yep.
Where'd they meet?
They met here in Chicago. My dad was a disc jockey on a little radio station, and it was actually my mom's friend would listen to my dad. She like had a crush on my dad, so she listened to his show all the time.
Yeah.
And when my mom would go over to her house, they would like call in all the time and like, ask requests for songs or whatever. And eventually through that, he started talking to my mom and said, hey, I'd like to meet. And he said he had some book or something that he wanted to give her. So he kind of used that as the excuse, and then they met up that way.
What was the book? Was it a good book? I love books.
I don't even remember which book it was, but I think he was just using it as an excuse.
Yeah,
so.
just an excuse. Now, I only really got to see just a brief portion of the Timcast, but I remember reading in the title, was it the Escape from Castro?
Yes.
So what exactly happened in regard to Castro, Cuba? How did that affect your dad?
So my dad was born in 1940. In 1940, Cuba was a free democratic country. Later on in the later 40s, maybe early 50s, it came under a dictatorship through a man named Fulgencio Batista, who was actually an elected president before. And then after his term was over, he held office. He kind of threw a coup d'etat, so he seized power through military force. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of interrupted the democratic flow of the government in Cuba. So Fidel used that as an excuse to start his revolution. So his revolution was all about, according to him, he was going to give power back to the people. He was going to make Cuba a free country again, and really hiding his communist ties. Even when he was asked about it early in the revolution, he says, we're not red. The color of the revolution isn't red. Red meaning, like communist. And he just kept talking about freedom. He kept saying that he would hold free elections 18 months after. Like, as soon as he came into power, he said he was going to hold free elections 18 months later. When asked why wait 18 months, he was like, because if we do them now, I'll win. Everybody loves me. I'm going to win the election. 62 years passed. There was never one free election made in Cuba. So people started to catch wind of this after he came into power. My dad was one of those people where a lot of people in the beginning kind of supported Fidel because of his promises to give the power back to the people, to get rid of the dictatorship and stuff. Castro and his army were up in this mountain range called La Sierra Maestra in Cuba. That's where they kind of hid out during the revolution. They had like their base up there. And my dad actually went up there to help out as a volunteer, to help teach. They had, a lot of farmers kind of as soldiers and stuff. And he went up as a volunteer to help teach the farmers how to read and write, because a lot of them were illiterate. And when he was up there, he saw things that made him think twice about the revolution in Castro. He was actually asked to leave. He got kicked out. And then when he came back down, that's when he kind of, flipped sides, and he joined an underground movement that was called the Frank Pais 30th of November movement. And my father was the national head of the student sector of that movement, and he was in charge of propaganda. So they would like make newspapers speaking out against the government. They'd go out at these like little organized things and, kind of like hand out flyers to people or do whatever. Right? There was a bunch of stuff that they would do. But at some point, a lot of the stuff that my father did, because he was involved in propaganda, it was nonviolent, right? It was kind of speaking out against the government. But at some point, when you want to remove a dictator, it has to come through force, right? Like they say, you vote your way into communism, but you shoot your way out. So there were a lot of different underground groups that were kind of opposing the revolution, and their plan was to kind of come together at some point and throw this counter-revolution. So this point was coming up, and at one point my father was involved in an incident where he decided to leave. He was involved in an incident where a friend of his, he actually shot a friend of his by accident when they were trying to kind of commandeer this taxi for this operation that they were doing, and there was a shootout that happened. The taxi driver had a gun. A shootout happened, and my dad's friend ended up getting shot. My dad, obviously felt horrible about it. He didn't die or anything, but so after that, my father decided to stop fighting the revolution and decided to kind of escape Cuba. So he went to the Brazilian embassy where he stayed there for about like 6 months, and then boarded a plane, I believe, to Puerto Rico, and then from Puerto Rico to the United States, where his older brother was living here in Chicago at the time. So that's how he made it here. But right before he left, right before he entered the embassy, he met with one of his friends, whose name was Luis Samuel Sanchez Carpente. And this guy was my dad's second in command in their underground group. So if my dad, like, think, if my dad was the president, this was like the vice president. Before he left, he was like, I'm leaving. He had all the files that they had kind of acquired of like all the little missions that they did or whatever, any info that they had acquired through their group, and he handed it to him, and basically was like, he's in charge now,
Yeah.
And then my dad went to the embassy. Now, remember I told you that they were working for this kind of counter-revolution. Before my dad left, there was this guy claiming that he had access to all these guns, even like a tank and like all this stuff, right? And some people like didn't know if they trusted him, because at that time, you know how I said that there are a bunch of different groups?
Yeah.
Nobody knew who to trust because Castro had infiltrators all over the place. Right? Like there are people with the revolution that were infiltrating these smaller groups. So they planned this attack. The night before the attack was supposed to happen, everybody was arrested. Everybody that was involved. My father's second in command was arrested. He was arrested, and it was 22 days that they caught him, they charged him, they tried him, they sentenced him, and then they sent him to the firing squads. 22 days it took. So if my dad wouldn't have left at that time, that would have been my dad in his place, getting sent to the firing squad. So after my dad left, he ever since the day he set foot in America, he's kind of continued that fight. And to him, it's something that he can't leave, because otherwise the sacrifices of all his friends and all the people, that gave their lives would basically be for nothing. So to this day, he's still involved. He has he's a president of a Cuban civic committee here in Chicago. That's kind of a committee made up of exiles from Cuba, and they hold events like throughout the year, and they raise money, and they'll send it to dissidents in Cuba and other groups that are opposing the regime. And so I kind of get involved and try and help him out with that as much as I can also.
What's the state of Cuba now?
The state of Cuba now is they're still under kind of that Castro dictatorship. Although Castro passed away, he transferred power to his brother Raul, who then transferred power to the new acting president, who's named Miguel Diaz-Canel. So right now the people are still being oppressed. I mean, there was right around the time of my last fight in 2020, that summer,
I thought I saw videos.
There were these protests that started that never happened before. Like people were not going out in the streets and protesting. So a lot of these people were going out. They were protesting the government, and other countries tried to make it seem like they were asking for aid because of COVID, but they're not. They're going through the streets shouting out freedom. It's got nothing. It had nothing to do with COVID or medical aid for vaccines or anything like that. And the government of Cuba was really doing their best to shut that down. They would cut power so that everybody's internet service was gone, so that the people of Cuba who were out protesting couldn't be making videos and getting it out there. So they were trying to suppress everything that was coming out of the island. And they're still kind of in a state of unrest right now. I believe that there's not as many protests as there were back then in that summer, but there's still people that are going out and trying to do their best. But I mean, the regime did a good job of arresting all the people who were kind of leading these groups and leading these protests, and a lot of them we still don't know where they are or what happened to them. They're basically kidnapped by the government, and either I don't know if they're killed or if they're still rotting away in prison somewhere or what.
So Cuba's been under communism for 80 years, since the 40s?
Since 1959.
Since 1959?
Well, so Castro took over in 1959.
Okay.
Batista, I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure about the year. It was the late 40s or the early 50s when Batista took over, which he was also a dictator. But unlike Castro, he kind of left some of those freedoms alone. He was still a dictator, but like he didn't mess with the freedom of the press. Like the press were still able to kind of do what they wanted. Castro came in, controlled everything.
Yeah.
So
has Cuba ever experienced like peaceful time? Like, did your dad's dad, like, were there stories of like?
Yeah, like I said, when my dad was born in 1940. At that time, Cuba had their independence. They were a democratic country. They held free elections. Like I said, Batista was actually an elected president.
Okay.
And then,
then it converted
wanting to keep power, he seized it through a coup d'etat, and that's when kind of everything changed in Cuba.
Now, do you guys ever go back and visit Cuba? Or
I've never been. My dad, when he left, he kind of made a promise to himself that the next time he would set foot in Cuba, it'd be in a free Cuba.
Yeah.
And he also sees it as like, for him to go back there, he would have to ask permission from the regime to go back to his own country, and that's something that he's never willing to do, he says. So for me, I would love to go back, obviously, and see where my dad grew up, and my grandfather is buried there, and other relatives of mine, and I would love to, but it would kind of be just like a slap in the face to him if I were to just go over there. And
absolutely. Do you think there will be a free Cuba in?
I'm hoping so. Right now it kind of depends on the people of Cuba. There's not much that anybody else can do. They have to find it within themselves.
Yeah.
And obviously, like I said, I try to help my dad in those efforts to raise money and send it to Cuban dissidents. So after my last fight, I kind of gave a speech at the end of my fight, kind of dedicating it to the people of Cuba and kind of encouraging them to unite and keep fighting for their freedom. And after my fight, I did a little project where I made a bunch of T-shirts. I was really condemning the regime. It was basically a picture of me pissing on Fidel Castro's grave.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was selling it, and we were donating all the profits to different groups down there and sending it to also like some dissidents that were trying to leave. We helped one guy get out of Cuba. So trying to do my part as much as I can.
Now, did Castro naturally die, or was he?
No, I think he was just old. He was really old. I think he died of.
Damn.
I mean, they don't really say.
Yeah.
He was old. He got sick. He was in the hospital for a while, and then one day he was just gone.
So, one of my favorite movies growing up was Scarface.
Right behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies too.
And so, and I always really loved the opening. You know what I mean?
And that's actual footage of the Mariel boat lift. Like, they took real footage from. So I don't know. Are you familiar with the Mariel boat lift or what happened? So, it was around the same time. I think it was 1980 or 79 or 1980, and basically a lot of people wanted to leave Cuba. And Fidel just said, okay, you guys want to leave? Go. So he opened up the ports and allowed for a certain amount of boats to leave. Along with some of the people that left, he also kind of let prisoners go, like, out of jail, and not all of them were good people. That's how Tony got here. In the movie, he was in jail, and the Mariel boat lift was just an opportunity for a lot of those Cubans to leave the island, and a lot of Cuban Americans they got here, their family got here from that boat lift.
Yeah.
So.
It's nuts. It's a great opening.
It is great opening.
Movie scenes, and as a kid, I was like, I don't understand. But as the more I watched it, it was like he just starts, and like some of the scenes I remember, like these communist cockroaches or something. Like, you know what I mean. And he gets very passionate about it. I'm like, and then the more I understood, it was like, that would fucking suck. That would be absolutely horrible. And then I think, and I kind of related like now to almost like a form of empathy of being able to speak to somebody. You know what I mean? That's had family and friends and been directly affected and impacted by it. And I kind of think to myself, it's kind of like, now kind of looking at our world, I don't, fingers crossed and knock on wood, never hope America's under communism, but with, some of the decisions that we think we're making to make our country safer or better and like kind of just pacifying everything. Does your dad ever think like, you know what I mean? Like,
he hates the Democrats. Like, hates. And I think most Cuban Americans do. Yeah, they're very Republican. A lot of
because they know what, like, the signs.
They know the signs exactly.
And they know what it's like.
They've seen it before, and that's the thing is like a lot of these. I think of like this younger generation. They're kind of enamored with that thought of like a communist society, and the idea of true communism is a beautiful idea, right? Everybody's equal, we all have the same thing. But when it's put into practice, it doesn't work. It breeds laziness, and it's just Why would you go do that extra mile if you're not going to get anything more?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just, and then I don't know, man. It's how do I say this? Every other country, you just look in history, right? All the Latin American countries that have accepted communism are all very poor now.
Yeah.
Everybody that lives in the country is very poor now. It's like, what do you want to be? You want to, okay, we're all going to be poor, or you can work to be successful.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's a simple question like that, because the only thing that communism brings is misery, hunger, death,
Yeah.
and
Worst of all,
civil
pain.
unrest, yes, and pain. Just look around you, where in recent history where communism has gone to.
I was talking to somebody the other day. I was like, I think what would be worse than dying would be watching those you care about around you be oppressed and suppressed and have absolutely no freedom, no choices, stripped down to nothing and humiliated. So I could see, like, you know, like your dad was like, I ain't going back there unless it's a free
Yeah.
Cuba. It's like, to know your friends and your family and the people that when you bleed with people and sweat with, that's what I love about jiu-jitsu and like fighting. There's no greater way, I think, to bond with somebody than to like sweat and bleed with somebody and to shed tears and go through, like I like to say, the trenches. You know, whether
It's a
that
cleansing. It's a cleansing almost. You know, and
dude.
even like guys that you fight with, even if you have like an unfriendly build up to the fight, like you see every guy afterwards, what do they always do? You know what I mean? For the most part, I'm sure there are some grudges that stay grudged after the fight.
Yep.
But for the most part, you see guys like hug each other, and it's like going. It's almost like you know, going to war alongside somebody, like if you're in the military or something.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's weird, but it's like you create a bond in there with each other.
And what gives me hope is, I feel like I feel like we have enough diversification in our country where we've got so many people with different backgrounds I feel like they've experienced the effects of communism and just broken nations and countries through immigration, through their parents, whether that be directly or through themselves, directly or indirectly, where it's like we throw that mix in there, and then that kind of helps rally our cause and our fight against, you know, I always tell people, look, I don't really have any type of political association. I just like a free and ultimately just a free country where humans are safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just be safe and mind your own business. You know, Joe wants a gun, let Joe have a gun. You know what I mean? Mary wants to do this, that, whatever. Go ahead, that's fine. You know what I mean? Just don't kill each other.
Right.
You know, which probably sounds absolutely asinine, but when I break it down, I'm like, if we're free, you know what I mean, and you're able to do what it is you desire to do, I don't see, you know, why there shouldn't be any issues. But I think of different immigrants that have come from backgrounds of like, I think of like breathing. You know what I mean? You don't appreciate breathing through a clear airway until you've had a stuffed nose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you don't appreciate your freedom until you have no freedom.
Yes.
And then you start to see the signs, and we have different people in our nation, like your dad, where they're like, you don't want that.
Yes.
You don't want what you think you're asking for. You know, and I think it's like when people ask for the easy route, it kind of be like you training for a fight and just like every shortcut available, you take every shortcut. You know, I can think of shortcuts I've taken, and they always cut you short. You know what I mean? We always tell people here, it's like, when you get into sales, this is 100% commission. If you take a shortcut, you're going to have a short-term satisfaction. You know what I mean? But when you get paid, you're going to have no satisfaction.
Exactly.
You're not going to get paid.
That's why I love sports like MMA and like wrestling, where it's a one-on-one sport and you can't really rely on your teammates, because that forces you to work for every success that you have. And you can transfer that lesson into life, into any part of life, right? Because what you put in is what you're going to get out. So if you want to take the shortcuts, you're not going to get that full return back. But if you put in everything you can, you'll get everything out of it.
Absolutely. Now, as you started to transition from, now you wrestled at Elmhurst College, and you did well there, went to assistant, stayed there for a year, and then you got into fighting, and then when was your first? Now, was your first big fight? You said you were in. Was it the Zuffa?
It was the WEC. It was owned by Zuffa.
Okay.
Zuffa was the parent company that owned the UFC.
And in my notes, I think
in the beginning. Now it's WME-IMG when they sold.
And that was Casimir in 2010.
That was my 1, 2,
that the
3. My fourth fight in the WEC.
What was your first fight?
My first fight was against a guy named Bart Palashevsky, who was actually another local guy here from Illinois.
Wow.
He trained at Jeff Curran's in Crystal Lake.
Yep.
And we would actually, before I got the call to fight, we were both kind of training at one of the same gyms. So like we'd be in I'd never practiced with him, but we'd be in a practice together. So there was this wrestling school over in Naperville called Overtime.
Yeah.
Jeff Curran would bring his guys over there to learn how to wrestle. And that's where I was doing my jiu-jitsu. And when I started training there, the owners of Overtime kind of wanted to start their own MMA program, and they asked me to come along and teach kind of stand-up and stuff. And so I would practice with them a lot, and like Jeff and those guys would be there. So Bart was my first opponent in the WEC. A veteran. He was, I don't know if you remember the IFL. IFL was the International Fight League.
Yeah.
And it was a cool concept. It was like every city had a team.
Yep.
And like the teams would compete against each other. So he was already like, man, he was like 34-14. So he was over 40, almost 50 fights, you know. And I had 5 fights on my pro record. So I was going up against a crafty veteran on 4 days' notice, they called me. It was a Tuesday. And I remember I had just gotten home from work, and I was going to take a nap before I had to go to the gym and train. And I woke up to a voicemail, and it was my coach, like, give me a call back. You know, we got a good opportunity or whatever. So I call him back, and he's like, yo, we're going to fight on Saturday. I'm like, what do you mean fight on Saturday? I'm like, are you crazy? It's Tuesday right now. Like, So after he explained it to me, it was just an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I took it. I ended up winning the fight.
Wow. How'd you win?
I won unanimous decision.
Dope.
Yeah.
So that was your first fight in the WEC?
First fight in the WEC.
How'd the other 2 go leading up to Casimir?
My next one I lost, and then I won my third one. And then Casimir. The Casimir fight was when I started training in Miami, kind of I'd do like a month prior to the fight. I'd do in Miami. And that's when it really showed, because that's when I scored like my first like knockout, not like he went out cold.
Yeah, dude, flying. I called it a flying knee.
Yes, flying knee, yep.
When I was watching the breakdown, they called it something different.
Yeah, I mean, somebody call it like they call it like a skip knee. It's still technically like a flying knee. Yeah.
I was like, it's a flying. I mean, it's a flying knee.
Yeah,
so,
and we drilled that move every single day that month leading up to the fight.
Dude, the mouthpiece went flying.
Yeah.
That was nuts.
Yeah.
That was nuts. So Casimir in 2010, and I had Swanson and Lamas. So 2011, arm triangle.
Yep. Yeah.
The arm triangle, I've seen people not finish, and then I've seen people like finish it like full mount, like not even having to jump off to the side. And
right.
Like even for myself, every time I try to hit it, I jump off to the side and have to like almost work my way up. But what I noticed in the breakdown was they said you got the, I'm assuming you just got your head under the arm and then off the ear is what they said. Isn't the telephone?
He was trying to defend with the telephone.
Yeah.
So in that fight, what happened was in the first round, first of all, that going into that fight, it was a very emotional fight for me. My grandmother had passed away 1 week before the fight. That's why I had like the cancer ribbons shaved in my head.
And you were. I was like, I wonder if this is his first big victory, because you were emotional. After the fight.
I broke down. I mean, it was a very emotional week, and I was in the middle of cutting weight, and like you're kind of out of it when you're doing that. Yes. So I had to delay going out to it was in California in Anaheim.
Yeah.
I had to delay going out so that I could attend the services of my grandmother. So I did the wake one night, the funeral was the next day, and then I went from the cemetery to the airport to fly out for my fight. Landed in Anaheim, California, got off the plane the night before the weigh-in, and had to go straight to the gym to cut weight. And it was just a real emotional fight.
Was this your mom's mom or your dad's mom?
My mom's mom.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember the first round, I like couldn't get going. You know what I mean? Like you could see it like the way I enter the cage in every fight. I'm very bouncy. I like run around the cage. In this fight, I just walk to my corner. I had to stand there. Like, my head was somewhere else. So Cub did a great job first round. He was tagging me with some stuff. And what set up my submission in the second round was in the first round, he got me in a guillotine that was super tight. I mean, it was in. And I don't know how I got out of it, but I did. So in the second round, he was fishing for the guillotine, but he was kind of out of position a little bit. So I wasn't in his guard. I was off to the side, and he was reaching back for my head. So when I felt that, I kind of went up, boom, pulled it in, and secured up that arm triangle. And yeah, he was trying to defend. They call it, using the telephone.
Telephone, yeah.
But it was in too tight.
Yeah, dude,
So.
that sucker was in there, and now were you? So, because I'm curious, Dad's dad, he passed away in Cuba. Did your grandma on your dad's side, did she pass away in Cuba too? Then
No, she passed away here.
Okay.
So when my dad was here, he had two brothers. One of them was living here in Chicago. Another one was a political prisoner for almost a decade. So just for being involved with my father's uncle, who would help Cuban dissidents, they'd lock you up. Yeah. So he was locked away for the better part of a decade. And so there was like this loophole where if my grandmother would have came to the United States, she could have asked for the release of her son.
Yeah.
So that's basically what they did. They brought her to the U.S. She asked for the release of my son, of her son, I'm sorry. So he got released. He had to do like a work program when he was released from prison.
Yep.
That's right around the time that my grandfather passed away. And then my grandmother passed away here in the States.
Are you close with your uncles on your dad's side?
I was. Both of them have passed since. Okay. But my dad's oldest brother, I was pretty young when he passed away. I still have very good memories of him, though. Like, he'd come to visit us and stuff. And then my dad's other brother, he was living in Miami. So every time I would go down for camp, I'd see him all the time. He'd invite me over. He'd even come to the gym to watch me train, because actually in Cuba, he was a judo national champ in the brown belt division. So he loved to come watch and see us train, because I guess it reminded him of his old judo days and stuff. And then he'd invite me over for dinner and try and force feed me food when I couldn't eat. And I was, but
is there anything unique, before I get back into these fights, unique about the Cuban culture that like stands out to you? I love food, so I don't know if there's like a plate of food or like a holiday or anything really unique.
Cuban food is awesome. I mean, and it's not like if you think of Hispanic food, a lot of people think of Mexican food and like spicy food, but Cuban food isn't spicy. It's really good. I mean, if I don't even know how to explain it, but white rice and black beans are like a staple of the Cuban diet, and they do a lot of good meats that kind of accompany that, but it's not spicy. Like their main ingredients in their cooking is basically garlic, onion, and green pepper.
Do they plantains
lime.
also?
Plantains, yes. Yeah.
Now,
they do
is that
plantains.
Brazil too?
There's a lot of Latin countries do plantains.
Okay. Now is it Spanish speaking, or is it Portuguese?
It's Spanish.
Okay.
Spanish. Cuba's Spanish, yeah.
Is there a different dialect than typical, like, because when I try to speak a little bit of Spanish, I've talked to people that are from Spain, Mexico, Cuba, and there's different dialects. Yeah. Is it a different dialect than the typical like Mexico Spanish?
There's different like slang terms. Okay. I wouldn't say like different dialect, and there's, you could tell, like if I hear somebody speaking Spanish, like a Cuban and a Mexican, I can tell the difference between, like if they're not saying where they're from and they just speak. Yeah. I could tell this guy's from Mexico, this guy's from Cuba.
So you're bilingual? Yeah. Okay. Now, is Brazil Portuguese?
Brazil is Portuguese.
Okay. Because I remember I was talking to a gentleman from Brazil, and I like tried to talk to him in Spanish. And it was like,
my trainers down from Miami were Brazilian, so I'd catch on a little bit of Brazil Portuguese also. Yeah.
Now, this next fight I had down here, Grice, and we actually talked about Grice. So what was the build up to that fight? Now that was
my first fight in the UFC.
First fight in the UFC.
Yes. So that was in 2011. They basically, UFC had bought the WEC. Yep. That was when I signed on to the WEC, and by 2011, they had already merged over a bunch of weight classes. Yep. So when I first signed on, the WEC actually had, I believe they had all the weight classes, like from 125 to heavyweight. Okay. When I got into the WEC, after a couple of events, they had merged 170 and up into the UFC already. So now the only thing that was left was 125, 135, 145, and 155 in the WEC. Yeah. And in 2011, they decided to merge us all in. So they decided to take the lower weight classes and add them into the UFC. So that was my first fight. I also decided to go down in weight class because in the WEC I fought at lightweight, 155 pounds.
Yep.
It was always a very easy cut for me, and like I would eat whatever I wanted on the weekends. I wasn't like dieting like very strictly, so I was like, this is your dream now. The UFC is calling, so like we got to take this serious. So I decided to make the drop to 145 pounds and make my debut there. So that was a huge fight because like I said, when I was younger, I tell my friends, you're going to see me in the UFC one day. Like this was it. You know what I mean? So it was really important to me. And Matt Grice was a guy who was a veteran of the UFC already. He had some UFC fights. I think he got cut, and then they brought him back again. So this was his first fight back, and he was a tough guy. He was actually a really good wrestler from Oklahoma. I believe he was like a 4-time state champ. He had like huge potential in college, and then he like got into a car accident, I think his freshman or sophomore year, where he like went through the windshield of the car. Wow. And that really kind of messed up the rest of his college wrestling career. But then he went to fighting. He was very successful and just a great guy too. So I will like still keep in contact with him.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Now, so you caught him in that fight. You caught him you stumbled him with a kick. Yeah. And then you got him with the left. Yeah. And then just pretty much finished it. Yeah. As that fight wrapped up, now your first fight you win in the UFC. What were the thoughts going on in your mind? Like, what was going on? What was your plan?
It was just that, like, all these dreams that I had as a kid basically came to fruition in that fight. Yep. You know what I mean? It's one thing to, like, go make it to the UFC. There are a lot of guys that can make it to the UFC, and then they'll lose 2 or 3 fights, and then they'll get cut. Yeah. You know what I mean? But making it to the UFC, winning my debut, now I felt like I could call myself like a real UFC fighter. Yes. So it was like all those dreams as a kid that I had of being in there and fighting and winning came true right there in that moment.
Now, the next fight I got down here is Bermudez in 2014. You finished him with a guillotine. But from 2011 to 2014, what fights happened in between there that, if you can remember?
So I had quite a few and actually had my title fight in between there. Okay. So after Grice, I fought Swanson. After Swanson, I fought Hatsuhioki, which was a highly touted Japanese fighter. He was like a European champion. He was actually offered a title fight against Aldo, but he told the UFC, no, I'd like one more before I fight for the title. And they're like, okay, you're going to fight Lamas. I ended up beating him. Then after that, I had my first fight in my hometown in the UFC in Chicago against Eric Koch, who was another former #1 contender, who was set to fight Aldo. Then he got injured. That fight didn't happen. So on his comeback, they set him up with me, and I TKO'd him in the second round at the United Center, which was like another huge thing. Growing up in Chicago and being able to fight at the United Center where like Michael Jordan played basketball was just huge. And then after that, I got my title fight. I dropped a decision loss to Jose Aldo.
And that was a fight where you were like,
this just
dude's nuts.
He's good, man. He was good.
Yeah.
That was back when he was kind of in his prime at the top of his game and just running through people. And I was just being a little too tentative. You know, there's a lot riding on that fight. And, when you're at that level and you're on the cusp of like being a world champion right there, it's just, I couldn't flip it on for that fight.
Now, as you go to fight Bermudez, what was your record at that point?
I had 2 losses on my record. Both occurred in the WEC. In the UFC, my only loss was to the champ, Jose Aldo. I had bounced back after that fight and actually beat one of Jose Aldo's training partners, Hakran Diaz. Okay. Then I was set to fight Dennis Bermudez, and this was another special fight to me because this was the UFC's first event in Latin America, which was in Mexico City. Wow. So leading up to that fight, they used me and some other guys to really kind of promote this event and build it up because it was a historic event. It was the first time they broke into Latin America. So it was really important to me being half Mexican. Also, my mother, like I said, was born in Mexico. And going down there and a lot of things, like I didn't know Mexico City was so high in altitude. They're like, it's over 7,000 foot altitude in Mexico City. So I was kind of worried about that a little bit. Yeah. But luckily, I was just on that night. You know what I mean? There was like nothing he was doing. I was countering everything. I dropped him a few times.
Did he shoot in for the guillotine? Like he shot in and you threw him in a guillotine?
He shot in after I dropped him with a jab. So he came in, pop, I
dropped
caught him
for
with
the
a jab. He dropped, and then just kind of like tried to scramble to the leg, and I got him in a front headlock and shot my guillotine in.
Now, when you go to shoot and someone tries to throw a guillotine on you, what's your immediate defense for that? Just like head up and like push through?
You have to focus on the legs.
Yeah.
So if they got your head, if you're fighting here and they wrap the legs around you, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But if you have my head and I'm blocking your legs from pulling guard and I hop my legs off to the opposite side of my head, then I'm safe. So a lot of people have that first resort to come here to fight the guillotine instead of fighting the legs, which is really what's going to lock you into the choke. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So pushing on the legs?
Blocking the legs, right? Blocking the thighs.
But if you went in for a shot, like...
If I go in for a shot, I'm trying to finish out of your guard, right? Whether we're going straight down to the ground, I'm either throwing my legs up and over to the side, or I'm lifting you and turning you to land you in side control. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
So there's other ways you can kind of escape guillotines too in full guard, and they're not fun. I mean, I don't ever want to be in there. But if somebody has guillotine and wraps legs around you, there's a good defense that I use up against the cage where I'm kind of smashing them into the cage and taking that angle away for them to get the choke.
Yeah.
You could roll to your side with your head on top and then start framing off the knees to make your hips escape out of their guard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff.
I find when I go against these guys down at 10th Planet, I feel like the blast double is the best thing for me to just go.
Keeping the head in the middle.
Keep that head in the middle. They don't really like try to throw the guillotine in there, and I'm coming with enough force to.
Yep. Or to stick with a single leg, head on the inside.
Head on the inside, single leg.
And keep their leg in between yours.
Keep the leg.
Don't let them wrap that leg on the outside.
Do you like ankle picks?
I do. In wrestling, I was a huge low level guy.
Yeah.
I'd always shoot low singles, which is kind of similar to an ankle. You're attacking the ankle.
Yeah.
In
and
MMA,
just swinging around basically.
Right. In MMA, they're a little harder to pull off because there's no shoe to grab onto, and their foot could slip. You could just turn and pull your foot out pretty easily. But Randy Couture, when he fought James Toney, the boxer.
Yes.
James Toney.
Yeah.
He went low level on him right away. Took him down and then pounded him.
Damn.
That was like the only low level I've seen in the UFC.
Damn. That's crazy. I want to, before I get to the next fight, super ducks.
Super ducks.
Yeah. You ever hit any of those? You like those?
That was my move. My move. Yeah. So, and it wasn't a typical a super duck. You have one hand on the floor and you windmill out with the other hand.
Yeah.
The way I was taught, there was this guy that went to my high school, Pat Cork. He was a runner-up at University of Illinois at the national tournament. He took second at nationals, and he actually lost to Mark Munoz, who was another UFC fighter. He taught me. He called it a misdirection double. So it's almost the same form as a super duck, but you don't put your hand on the floor. You reach for their leg. So you act like you're coming in. You're shooting a single leg on this side, and then you misdirect and you windmill out on the other side, and you end up in a double leg.
How important is that windmill in there?
Very important, because you're baiting them in to hook your arm, right? If somebody shoots in with their arm up like this, the natural reaction is to try and catch the underhook, right, as they're shooting in. So when they're going like this and you windmill out and they miss your arm, then as they're sprawling, they go flat to the mat, and you can end up like right behind them.
It makes sense. I feel like I try like a hybrid horrible. I'm like, you're talking about the windmill, and I'm like, I'm definitely fucking a windmill up.
Yeah, you got to hit yourself in the butt with the back of your hand. Whoop.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
That's kind of the secret to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. So we go into guillotine Bermudez, and then into this one I was really excited to talk about. 2016, you guillotine Charles Oliveira, who's currently the champion.
Lightweight champ.
He's currently the lightweight champ. So,
and I technically fought him at lightweight because he blew weight by 9 pounds. Wow. For that fight. So we were set. This was another, actually, I don't even know if I was going to fight, right? Because before I was set to fight Charles, I was supposed to fight BJ Penn in the Philippines as a main event. BJ got injured, pulled out of the fight, and then the UFC decided to cancel the entire event. I went out to the Philippines. I did promo for the fight with BJ. We did our face-off and all that stuff.
Now, when they do that, there's no, compensation package of, hey, you paid for this. Here's, a...
I mean, they pay for the trip. They give you, money to eat with or whatever.
Yeah, but if you're also banking on making money from the fight too, that
Right.
it's pretty much just kind of like an FU. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it is. So when they canceled the event, they did throw us some money,
Okay,
but it
that's
was
not that
nowhere
bad.
near what
Even
I
like
would
what
have
you'd
made.
make if you like what is
Even
it?
if I would have lost.
Lost.
Yeah, my show money they call it. You get your show money and your win bonus.
Okay.
So it wasn't. It was like a fifth of my show money, maybe
Damn.
at that point. So I was set to fight him. They canceled the entire event, so I was left without a fight. I'm like, what the fuck? So they scrambled and they put me on a card about a month later in Mexico City, and they set me up with Charles Oliveira. So I don't think he must not have been training at the time. I think he kind of took it on shorter notice. And I get out to Mexico first night. I'm in the sauna cutting weight. He's in the sauna cutting weight. He doesn't look like he's dying or anything, And then weigh-ins come, and Reed Harris, he was the president of the WEC, and then when they merged, they kind of brought him in as an employee, and he was in charge of all of like the foreign events, kind of, I guess, the international events. So he came up to me. I had already weighed in. I made weight. I'm in like the lobby of the hotel getting like breakfast or something, and Reed comes up to my table and he's like, I got some bad news. And I'm like, shit, I already knew he was going to tell me, right? Like he missed weight. So he's like, Charles missed weight. I don't think the commission's going to let the fight happen. And I'm like, why not? Because he missed weight by so much, the commission almost didn't let the fight happen.
Yeah.
I told Reed, I was like, listen, I didn't come down to Mexico for nothing. I'm fighting. So, go tell the commission that I'm good. I'm ready to go. I'll fight the guy. I don't care how much over he is. So Reed went back and talked, and then the fight was still on. So luckily we still got to fight, and that was another good fight. Charles came out hard in the first round. He had me in some trouble in some spots.
Yeah.
I fought out of a couple submission attempts, and then second round comes in. We're exchanging on the feet. I'm landing a couple things. He shoots in for a double leg and takes me down. I reversed it really quick, and then he's trying to scramble back up to his feet. I dropped into a guillotine, and he was playing possum for a little bit, but that thing I knew it was in. I was like, he was kind of sitting there.
When you had it in, did you have some people will bring the arm over the shoulder. Did you bring the arm over the shoulder?
No, it was an arm-in guillotine. So normally when people bring the arm over the shoulder is when it's a no-arm guillotine, when they just have a hold of the neck.
Yeah.
So I had his arm in it.
Which one do you think is like more?
I like arm-in more.
No.
I feel like the no-arm ones are easier to defend unless somebody gets that high elbow.
But if I should switch my shit up, because I literally if I go for a guillotine, I'm always going for just the over the shoulder and just get at least one. Now, how important is it to get? Do you need to get both legs, or
you don't need to? No, like when I submitted Charles, I didn't have full guard wrapped around him. And when I submitted Bermudez, I wasn't full guard either. Actually, I started off in kind of, knee across the belly, and then this one over the top.
Yep.
And he tried to roll. I ended up in mount and finished from mount on Bermudez.
Yep.
And then with Charles, I was in the kind of the same position, kind of like shin on belly, this leg over the top. And then I pushed off the fence to get a little bit more of an angle.
Yep.
And then that's when I squeezed, and then he ended up tapping. So.
Now, and then when you have just the arm in, you don't really need to do anything excessive when you have an arm in guillotine. I mean, it's just getting that guard in place.
There's a lot of like little details that I feel like a lot of people don't do in guillotines, like some common mistakes that people make, or at least it doesn't work for me, is they'll get in a guillotine, they'll lock guard up, and then they stretch the person out.
I heard you're supposed to come in.
Exactly. When I get a guillotine, I climb my guard up as high as I can. I ball up really tight.
Yeah.
And then I flex my lat muscle on whatever side his head is on, right? So I flex the lat, I do a side bend, and then I always tell people, put your elbow in your pocket.
Yeah.
And that's how you crank that guillotine.
Like
so you never want, yes, yep. So I like compress everything in. I'm never stretching people out and pulling on the neck. I'm always cranking everything in.
It almost becomes more like a crank.
It's definitely a choke.
Yeah.
It's a choke, yeah, for sure.
But if you're stretching out, do you feel like it's more like a crank, or it's still a choke if you're stretching everything out?
I feel like people feel like it's a choke, and it can choke. It can choke, you know what I mean? But if you're sweaty and the guy is sweaty and he's got grease on his face and you're stretching like this, the head
especially
could just
with those
pop
fat
out.
ass gloves on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you guillotine Oliveira. Now, did he take a shot? Or how did you?
How did I get the guillotine?
Yeah.
He shot in and actually finished a double leg. So he got kind of lazy. And there's a sweep that I do that I kind of made up on my own, and I hit it on him and ended up on top. And he like went to kind of referee's position in wrestling, and I was kind of behind him. And then as I was behind him, I reached over the top of his head and dropped into the guillotine as he was I'm assuming he was trying to get back up to his feet.
Damn. Next fight I got is Elkins, 2018.
Yeah.
Elkins.
Argentina.
You were in Argentina.
Yeah.
And you finished. It looked like an elbow.
It was some ground and pound. I hit a few elbows on him, and then some hammer fists, and then the ref
Just
stopped
good old
it.
ground and pound.
Yeah.
Now, what was that fight to you? Just another.
That was me and Elkins used to train together.
Okay.
Back in the day, I would see him out in Indiana. Sometimes I'd go out and train with this team out there. Elkins would come, so and we would actually practice with each other. Like I'd roll with him and stuff like that. I always had a lot of respect for him. I always knew how hard of a worker he was. And it was a fight that you never want to fight someone that or that you're friends with or whatever, but in this business it's hard to stay away from that. If that's a fight the UFC approaches you with, you got to take it or your family doesn't eat, So it was hard fighting against kind of like a friend and a former teammate, but you got to put feelings aside. And, at the end of the day, I know that he's going to go in there and try and hurt me just as much as I'm going to try and hurt him. So,
Fighters know it's business.
It is 100. Yeah, for sure. So I was like, well, we can be friends again after the fight.
Yeah.
So, and I knew how tough he was and how durable he was. So when I finished him, it was late in the third round.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of guys fight him and they have him hurt or they think they have him hurt. He battles through it and they end up punching themselves out trying to finish him.
Yep.
And then they're just gassed after that. And then Darren comes back and takes over and will win the fight.
That happens like we were talking about with jiu-jitsu. I've noticed that happen too. I'll notice fatigue with too many not even attempting submissions, just defending submissions. My arms will start to fatigue.
Yeah.
With punching, I'll also notice when you spar for a little bit, you maybe I just don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but
no, for sure,
fatigue. You know what I mean? Your muscles. It's your heart might want to keep going, but like you said, it's
especially if you're clenching.
Yeah.
So that's why you got to stay relaxed, right? They say that you don't clench your fists until you punch.
Okay.
So everything's got to stay relaxed. Otherwise, have you heard of people riding motorcycles and white knuckling? They're squeezing on the handlebars so much that they burn their grip out.
Yep.
It's almost like what you're doing in the gloves. If you're tense the whole time, balling up your fists. So you got to stay more relaxed.
You got to cue your boy Bruce Lee. Be still.
That's right.
Be like water. Dude, I used to watch a little motivational clip from him every day when I first started.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time.
Absolutely incredible. Now your last fight, I didn't get to completely finish. This is about as far as I got to study up. Is 2020. It's when you retired. You hated it essentially because you retired during COVID and you wanted to go out on a dub. Now I think you went out on a dub though.
Yeah.
Right. So
and fight of the night.
Fight of the night. Went out on a dub down in Vegas. So there's pros. There's pros to that. Now, who did you fight, and what was the result of that fight?
I fought. He was a newcomer to the UFC, so I was supposed to fight Ryan Hall, who was, the heel hook expert guy. He'd just do Imanari rolls the whole time, and it was maybe the third time we were supposed to fight. We were supposed to fight earlier in the year, right when COVID came, and they ended up canceling the event. They rebooked us, and then he got injured again, so. They were scrambling around trying to look for an opponent for me. This was maybe a week before the event when he called in about his injury. I was getting ready to leave. I remember I was doing my pre-COVID test to fly out or whatever. So then they were scrambling around. They were sending me options, and I was we were sending back, okay, this guy, and then they're like, okay, Bill Algeo, and I was like, all right, fine. So. He was a tough guy. He was in shape because he was just coming off a fight a few weeks earlier. So it's not like he came off the couch. So he was ready to go. He was still in shape, and he brought a hell of a fight. It was his chance to go in there and show the UFC that he deserved to be there. And even though he lost, he did show that he deserved to be there. And he caught me with some good stuff. He smacked me with a knee right on my chin in the second round that, turned me around. I didn't know where I was for a second. But just kind of being a veteran and being experienced and having fought out of danger before, I was able to battle through that. I came back in the third round and made it like a 10-8 round. I dominated the third and then ended up winning a unanimous decision, and we got fight of the night also on top of that.
Dope. So that's dope. What does the future look like for you? What are the future goals, vision? You run a UFC gym in Naperville. Do you do anything else outside of that?
Not right now. I do little things here and there. I do like UFC preview shows with this channel called Stadium that they're at studios in the United Center. Okay. It's like a streaming sports channel. So it's me, CM Punk, and the host of the show, Dave Ross. So we do those usually for every pay-per-view event. I'd love to get into more stuff like that, or like color commentating. And then I'll also, with the gym, I love it. I love being in the gym every day. I love teaching guys. Yep. I'd love to build up some of these fighters and get them into a big show and, kind of live through them a little bit.
Vicariously live.
Yeah, exactly. Like, listen, even though I'm retired, I still have that itch. I want to go back every day. You know what I mean?
How often do you still roll, and do you spar
every day,
at all?
Every day.
So just roll, or do you spar also?
Both.
Okay, dope. So who's courageous enough to step in the ring with you?
A bunch of my guys are.
Yeah?
Man, they love it. They'll come in, they'll try and take it to me every time.
You go all out, or you just kind of reciprocate? What you give,
I reciprocate.
Yeah.
I reciprocate. I tell people all the time, hit me as hard as you want to get hit back. So, and some people don't learn that lesson, but they do after the round's over.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, so.
You ever have anybody come in there thinking oh, I'm fucking coach up today?
I've had, I've had some things I even feel a little bad about. I had one guy throwing up on the mat after a round. Yeah. Because he got a little too happy with his power, and I even gave him a chance. I was walking towards him covered up, and he kept hitting me harder and harder and harder, and a minute and a half had passed, and I said, that's enough. So I go in, and when I go after you, I'm not trying to knock you out. I'll drop you with a leg kick, or I'll drop you with a body punch.
Yeah.
So I dropped him with a body punch, and he was laughing on the ground, oh, that was good. I go, no, the round's not over yet. Get back up. So I made him get back up. I dropped him 2 or 3 more times. On the last time, as soon as I hit, he just started spewing vomit out of his mouth all over the mat, all over the side of the mat, and then I made him clean it up afterwards. So.
My God, don't mess with the coach. Don't mess with the coach.
It reminds me of the what's his name? Christopher Walken. Have you ever heard that quote that he's got in a movie? He's talking about a lion in Africa. And it's so hot, and the little cubs are nipping at the lion's feet. And
from the Lion King?
No, it's not from the Lion King. It's from a different movie. But basically, he's saying that the cubs are nipping at the lion's feet, and then the other animals see this, and they start taking advantage of the lion and eating his food.
Yes.
Until one day, the lion just rips the shit out of everybody.
Yes.
And he goes, because sometimes the lion has to show you who he is,
yes,
or who the king of the jungle is. That's what I think.
You got to be careful. You know what I mean? You mess with the wrong guy, and they'll put you in a heel hook and injure leg for a couple years.
No, that's a little harsh. You can't mess with that stuff, man. Yeah. Like I said, a nice hard leg kick where you fall, or a body shot. Yeah, you'll get up from that.
Yeah, I guess it's a little.
But tearing somebody's knee apart with a heel hook is not a good thing.
Now, when I was gonna ask, when you roll against aggressive leg game guys, what's your go-to? Do you just try to stay away from getting entangled in that?
Yeah, don't let them control the ankles.
Are you nice? I mean, obviously, but some people that you have is your game built around guillotines opposed to I feel like everyone's got a niche once they're high level in jiu-jitsu. Hey, this is my niche. I build up my setups, all kind of correspond.
Guillotine is my best submission.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different spots that I hit it from. There's a lot of setups, and there's a lot of variations of the guillotine that I do.
Yeah.
So I can get it from almost anywhere on the mat. And, ever since coaching and stuff like that, I've been – and this was something that, my sensei made me do too, is, being a wrestler, I'm used to being on top. I always wanted to be on top. And my coach in Miami would, force me to start on my back against guys just so I can get better from my guard. And I feel like I'm really good off my back and setting stuff up. So – guillotine is my best submission. But guillotine, Darce, I do tons of chokes. So like
Yeah.
anything attacking the neck, I love attacking the neck. I'd say those are my best
I
ones.
feel like the only Darce I ever try to go for, and I always get stuck in north and south or whatever the hell it is
Yeah.
when the opponent's got like side guard on you and you kind of like cross face and then come up underneath
Yeah.
to try to finish with the
Yeah,
Darce.
ghost
and,
escape.
yeah, I always get stuck.
Yeah.
I always get stuck in there. But this was dope. There's some things I want to finish up with. Favorite movie?
Oh my God. Well, Scarface was one of them for sure.
Yeah, Scarface got to be.
Yeah,
up
100%.
Anything outside of Scarface?
I like all of the. I mean, it's kind of along the same lines of Scarface, but all the gangster movies.
Yep.
You know, Goodfellas, Casino, Donnie Brasco.
Have you seen
Carlito's
Kill the
Way.
Irishman?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
It was made in 2011, and it is a great. It's about the union mob and everything like that in Cleveland. Phenomenal movie. It's there's another one, The Irishman. I think it's really similar. That one came out more recently, and I think that's Hoffa's, and that's more Chicago
Okay.
related. One of them's on Prime Video, the other one's on Netflix, I think. But both phenomenal movies. Favorite food?
That's a toss-up. It's a three-way, Mexican food, Cuban food, and Peruvian food.
I've been to Peru.
Oh, have you?
I went to Lima when I was 16 for
That's
a
awesome.
missions trip, and that was great exposure as well to just like what's possible, what's out. Because I was in the slums of Peru, the most happiest people with absolutely nothing. Nothing, just mud huts, and and simultaneously with having nothing, they had everything.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like there was just a consistent pureness to everything. The food was phenomenal. It was like different food than.
Yes.
Like it was the same food, but it was like
they have like a Japanese influence on their cooking.
Yes. Yeah.
So like their ceviche is almost like a sashimi.
Yep.
Like their fish ceviche. They do a lot of stir fries.
Yeah. There was a lot of stir fries.
Yeah. So
there was like parrots in the streets and shit. It was dope, dude. It was an awesome.
That's on the bucket list. I definitely want to go to Peru one day.
Loved it. I loved it. We got to tour a little bit too, but most part it was for the missions trip. So, do you have a favorite restaurant?
What are we talking? Fast food?
Probably just like if you had to like, just favorite in general. If it is a fast food place, whatever, just a favorite restaurant.
Being from the Chicagoland area, like Portillo's was a huge one. Growing. Oh my God, have you had it yet? Or
once or twice. Once or twice. I don't know. It's all right.
What do you get when you go there?
I DoorDashed it. I don't know if I should have went in person. Because DoorDash obviously brings down your value of it. And
then the fries aren't fresh, if you get it delivered.
I haven't had a true Portillo's experience.
Okay.
So that's something I definitely need to do. Yeah, it's something I definitely need to do. Do you have a favorite book? Some people aren't into reading, but some people maybe have a favorite book.
I read a few books by this guy, Sam Sheridan, that I liked, and one was A Fighter's Mind.
Yeah.
And he did interviews with different athletes of combat sports or wrestling and stuff like that, and kind of dove into how they think about competing and stuff like that. I'd recommend that to anybody who's in MMA.
Yeah.
Because MMA is really, it's mostly mental. I mean, definitely physical. You got to get ready for your fight and stuff. But if you don't have it up here, it doesn't matter how strong you are in the body. You're not gonna be successful.
I got one or two more questions. So I think the next would be, what's your favorite memory just of life up until this point?
My kids, having my kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I got three. Yeah, I got three. And it's not like one single memory. It's just kind of the collection of memories that I have with them,
kids.
With my kids. That's the meaning of life to me, is having children, having a family, taking care of them, creating those memories with them. And, to me, that's worth more than anything in this world.
Absolutely. And then kind of the theme of the podcast and the hoodie and everything, just kind of overcoming adversity, which, as a fighter, that's something you step in the ring, you got to overcome that every single time. But really just with life, everybody faces and fights adversity. What's the hardest adversity you think you've had to overcome up until this point in your life? Hardest battle.
I've had a lot. I've had a lot of mental battles. I've had a lot of camps where I've had a family member pass away. Like I mentioned, my grandmother passed away. Yeah. My grandfather passed away in another camp. A brother of mine passed away early on in my career. But those are hard to fight through. but it almost gives you a little bit of extra motivation to do it for them in their memory. As far as adversity, I think the biggest adversity I had to overcome in my career, it was at the end of my career. My second to last fight, I lost. I suffered 2 fractures in my jaw. So I snapped my jaw here and here. I had to get 4 titanium plates put in. And, you know, I had been wrestling with the idea of retiring for a while. Basically ever since my fight with like Jason Knight, which was before Charles Oliveira, I think, before. So I was like, you know, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, but like after getting my jaw fractured, it was something that I did not want as the final part of my career. Yeah. But trying to come back from that, like when you suffer a loss and then a loss like that, where you like go through surgery and you're basically not the same. And like my bite isn't the same anymore, you know, ever since that. Mentally to come back from that was very tough, but I had to prove it to myself. I had to prove it to everybody else that I'm not gone yet. You know what I mean? That I'm going to come back. I'm going to show everybody that you can come back from this and you can win and you can still keep going if you want to. So that was like my main goal, was to come back from that surgery, show everybody that, you know, shit happens, but you can come back from it. And I did. And, you know, that's when I fought Bill Algeo, and I put on a hell. I told you that, you know, he clocked me right on the chin with a knee. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh shit. And I was worried about that. I didn't know how my jaw was going to hold up after being fractured like that. Yeah. So I was worried about, you know, what if he lands a good shot on me and just puts me out? But you got to take that out of your head and you just got to fight through it. So I got hit with the good knee. I battled through it. I came back. I won. And everything that happened in that fight, the fight itself, winning fight of the night, winning the fight, my post-fight speech went viral in the Cuban community, Cuban American community, and kind of dedicating my fight to them and to like my dad's fight for a free Cuba. Everything was perfect, and like that's why I was like, you know what, it's time to hang it up now. The only thing that I could change if I could is I wish it didn't happen during COVID, that it was in an empty arena. I wish there was a crowd there, because it was weird. Like I was involved in fight of the night, but I didn't know it because we didn't have the reactions of the crowd. Yeah. Like there wasn't like, oh, ah, like you know when you're in a good fight with the reaction of the crowd. Yeah, but it was just like dead silent.
That had to be so weird.
It was like
very
a
sparring match, I guess. Yeah, it almost feels like. Well, where can people find you, and anything else you want to shout out that you're affiliated with business wise, or just anything at all?
Yeah, you can find me Instagram and Twitter at Ricardo Lamas MMA. You can find me at my gym, UFC gym in Naperville. We're off Royal St. George Drive and Ogden Avenue. You know, and I don't know if a lot of people know about UFC gym, but it's not a fighter gym. We're a very family friendly gym. Yep. We have a youth program that starts at 4 years old. 99% of our members are never going to step foot in an octagon or a ring to fight. They're doing it to get in shape, and we love helping everybody of all walks of life and all ability levels. So, you know, come on by. I'm there every day. I'm there Monday through Saturday. Sunday's my only day off. So
let's go.
They can come by there and learn from me directly.
Let's go. What it takes. So thank you again, Ricardo Lamas, and have a blessed day, brother.
You too, man.